This is my own personal story. I have plenty of ghost hunting stories as I've spent the past 20 years of my life investigating the paranormal. However, this story is much, much different. It was a typical night like any others we had had back in the days. A group of us would pile into a car and drive around listening to music and talking. This particular night, we decided to drive out to an area where a girl was recently found murdered. I guess it was just out of morbid curiosity or something. This place was pretty far out in the middle of nowhere, a really rural area with lots of woods and dirt roads. We drove around for a while, getting lost on several really creepy, dark dirt roads, and when we finally got to the area where the murder had happened, two of my friends were getting really freaked out at this point. My friend who was driving decided to mess around and try to scare us a little, and found a particularly dark dirt road to drive down. The road was completely pitch black. There had been nothing but trees on either side of us for at least a mile. We continued to drive down this road for at least another mile, and we come to a dead end. It's just nothing but trees all around us at this point. To continue to try and freak everyone out, my friend decided to turn off the engine and turn off the headlights. We sat in complete darkness for maybe 5 minutes or so. That's when we all heard noises coming from the brush and the trees in front of us. We sat silently, terrified of what we might see, hoping it was just an animal of some sort. But then we start seeing a very large shadow moving in front of the car. Frozen in fear, no one could speak. The moon was shining down through some of the trees in front of us, and when this shadowed being moved into the moonlight, the best description any of us could give is it looked like a wolf, standing and walking on its hind legs with a human-looking torso and a wolf head. Everyone in the car stood completely still, frozen in fear. We had never seen anything like this before. It stopped briefly to look at us, and once it did, we all completely freaked out. My friend started the car and threw it into reverse immediately to back up and get out of there as fast as possible. When she turned the headlights on, we saw it clear as day. It literally was a werewolf, like one you would see from the movie The Howling or something. As she backed up to get out of there, we saw it drop down on all fours and run in the opposite direction. To this day, we still recall the time we saw the werewolf of Pasco County. We continued to drive around late at night, but we've never seen anything like that again and hope we never do. About a decade ago, I used to work at a brewery/pub. It was set in a pretty big old building from the early 1900s or so. I worked there for a couple of years, and most of the time it was pretty chill, but backbreaking sometimes. On my time working there, I had two experiences that I could only describe as supernatural. The first one, it was a particularly late night, and I was tasked with closing the hangar/loading docks. I was about done, so I turn off all the lights, and making my way to the door, a beer bottle comes rolling towards me from the dark between two tall stacks of crates. It wasn't forceful or anything. It looked like somebody had gently placed it on the floor and rolled it towards me. I didn't think too much of it, so I picked up the bottle and placed it inside a half-empty crate. I turned around, and as I started walking, another bottle comes rolling from the same place. Then another. Tired and thinking it was a coworker who was trying to mess with me, I shout, "Hey, alright, come on, I gotta go. I gotta close up now." I expected to hear laughter or something, but instead it was dead silent. I waited a couple of minutes. I turned on my flashlight and started looking around the stacks of crates for what I thought would be a giggling coworker. After searching every corner, I gave up. I was a little weirded out at this point, but I just picked up the two bottles from the ground and placed them in the same crate as the first one. I turned off my flashlight and shouted at the darkness, "Alright, I'm locking up now. See you tomorrow." And just as I finished saying that, a crate full of bottles fell from one of the stacks and landed 2 feet from me. Glass shards and beer exploded everywhere. The next day I told my boss about it, and he said it was probably a rat. The thing is, those crates, when full, weigh about 20 pounds. How could a rat push that off the top? Talking to my coworkers, they told me they've also experienced weird stuff during closing hours. My second experience happened again when I was closing the place. This time I was closing the pub. When closing the pub, the last thing you usually do is restock the walk-in freezer. The freezer is probably just as old as the building itself, and it sits underground right beneath the bar. I was down there filling the freezer with kegs and crates. Being a very old freezer from a time when safety wasn't a big concern, the thing doesn't open from the inside. No handle, nothing, just flat steel door. So I did what I always did when I had to go inside that thing, and I put a keg securing the door open. I was halfway through the task when I hear the door slam shut. I rush towards the door, but it's locked shut. I start pounding on it, but the only other person there was my boss, who was in his office 2 floors above me, probably with his door closed as well. I tried my phone, but since I'm locked inside a steel lead box, I had no service. I was wearing only jeans and a t-shirt, so things were getting really cold really quickly. My face was going numb, and my hands were getting stiff. I made a blanket out of cardboard, but it wasn't doing a very good job at keeping me warm. The only reason I didn't freeze to death was because I had a date with a regular, and she went there looking for me. She asked my boss where I was, and when he couldn't find me, he went to the basement and found me inside the freezer. I was there for about 45 minutes when he had found me, and I was starting to consider writing a letter to my parents, fearing I would die. My boss installed a chain to keep that door open after that, but I refused to ever walk in that death trap again. Weirdest part was, the keg I had holding the door open was at the other side of the room when I got out. It was a full steel keg, not something that just slides away easily, let alone quietly. I stopped working there shortly after that. When I had turned 21, I decided to move out of my family home. A coworker of mine was relocating and offered his old room to me. It was in a shared house in Redfern, an inner-city suburb around notable areas such as Newton and McDonald town. My new home was this grungy old Victorian-style house filled to the brim with dark paintings. During the move, my friend remarked that I should beware of the ghost. Assuming he was joking, I laughed it off and poked fun at him about it. He explained the ghost used to live here in the room that you're taking way back in the 1800s. He won't harm you, but he likes to watch. Being a little creeped out, I laughed again, asking why this so-called ghost would like to just watch. According to my colleague, he was a baby killer, and the babies are still stuck in the plumbing, and that he's admiring his work. I wasn't sure what he meant at the time, but I dropped the topic, assuming he was just messing around with me. For context, this was my first time living with people I had never met. I was quite paranoid. It took me a long time to warm up to the housemates. As a result, I absolutely always locked my door. It was non-negotiable. Whether I was in the room or not, the door and windows were always locked. So when I woke up one night, noticing that my door was slightly ajar, I panicked. I remember I was quite dazed and confused, but when I noticed the door was open, I felt a horrible sensation. I began to think I was being robbed, and I couldn't move out of fear. I couldn't see much of anything for a while and didn't feel any other presence in my room, so I started to think if I had really forgotten to close the door or not. I definitely remember shutting and locking it, though. About 5 minutes had passed, and I noticed a silhouette standing in the door opening. It was dark, but my eyes had finally adjusted and I could see a face. I called out to it fairly loudly, asking, "Tim, is that you?" Tim being the housemate in the room closest to me, but no response. What felt like another 5 to 10 minutes had passed, and the whole while I was stuck in a trance-like state. This entire time I was staring at the silhouette and it hadn't budged. I could finally make out the person's face though. It was an old man. He had a thick mustache and was just staring back at me, softly smiling. It was terrifying, but the next thing I know, I'm awake with light shining into my eyes. It's about 10 a.m. and I had slept in. I supposed to myself that it was just a horrible dream and that my brain was playing tricks on me. I rolled onto my side and immediately I felt the same horrible sensation as if my stomach had dropped. Looking towards the door, it was open the exact same way it was in my dream I had convinced myself of. For years, that was the end of this story, but in December 2020, I decided to tell this on my live stream. I was explaining that it was likely just a dream and there's always a reason for things like this to happen. Upon hearing my story, one of my viewers asked, "You're not talking about the McDonald town murderers, are you?" I inquired what that was, and she explained that it was something to do with an old couple who used to kill babies, shoving their carcasses into the plumbing. She took a minute and sent me this article where a picture of an elderly couple was displayed. The man's face was exactly as I remember it, and to summarize, the article explains the story of Sarah and John Macon, who would baby farm. The act of raising children for unwed mothers and raising them for a fee. They would kill the babies for incredible profit and hide the bodies in places like pipes of rental properties and then move through various suburbs in the area that I was living at the time. As this episode comes to a close, I just wanted to take a minute and say thank you to all the new subscribers to the channel. Also, if you have your own ghost or paranormal story that you'd like to share, please feel free to leave it in the comments below, and maybe I'll feature it in a future episode of Tales of the Parabnormal. If you enjoyed this episode, you should consider liking, commenting, and subscribing for more paranormal content. Until the next one, see ya.